With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing Slash to be in your band.
Next up for lead guitar. You're in.
Cool. Yep, even easier than that. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One N.A. member FDIC.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here for the second part of the draft review show, and this is something we had a lot of fun with in part one, talking to Josh Reed, who's back again for part two to talk about the Ravens' third through sixth draft picks. We so far have covered Zay Flowers and Trenton Simpson, the round one and round three picks. Some other topics we talked about in the first show included some morphing of the passing offense, some of the unanswered questions, although we didn't get too deep into that. From this, how the Ravens addressed value and need in the initial stages of this draft, and also what it's like now for the Ravens entering the second contract for Lamar Jackson, and how tight the purse strings are going to have to be. So go back and download that if you haven't already. Give that a listen. Josh, we're happy to have you back for part two.
Glad to be back, Ken.
Always a pleasure to talk football with you, my friend. I guess let's move right on to it and into round four, when the Ravens are up again at 124. I think a lot of the Ravens fans getting very antsy for a cornerback by this point. Keely Ringo was still on the board. No, he was not. He was taken, I believe, at 105.
The Eagles traded up to take him.
Okay, so they did not have that option anymore. So, a lot of people wanted Trice. Corey Trice as a big, tall, a little bit slower footed cornerback who might make a lot of sense, a lot of length there. But the Ravens end up taking Tavius Robinson out of Mississippi. Talk a little bit about what your thoughts were.
First of all, my guy wanted them to take Darius Rush there. He was right for the pick, and he ended up going in the early fifth to the Colts. And they got I feel like a great steal of a pick. But going back to that Tavius Robinson, he's a bit of an older guy, but still kind of an ascending player. He's a guy that hasn't been in America too long. He started in I think it was Quebec,
Ontario.
Ontario. But yeah, he said that he was actually wanted to do the CFL thing before COVID, and ended up going to Ole Miss, and he's an interesting backstory. But as far as on the field, when I first saw his measurables and everything, I was like, okay, is this a guy who, if he puts on a little bit of weight, can play five technique? Or, what was their kind of envisions for him? And then Eric Costa made the comparison of comparing him, they envision him as more of a Zadarius Smith kind of role, a guy who can play inside and out, who can kick inside on pass rush downs and be that kind of versatile hybrid pass rusher. And just based on what I've seen from his film, I definitely think he can be that guy for the Ravens. And Zadarius Smith had a quietly productive rookie year. I think he had like 4 or 5 sacks as a rookie and generated some consistent pressure. So Octavius can be that kind of guy who comes in, accepts coaching, and fills that role for the Ravens. The Ravens are really, I think, their pass rushers at their best when they have that kind of hybrid, that Pernell McPhee guy, that's Jerry Smith guy, that guy who can bring the heat off the edge as well as on twists and stunts, or just line up over a guard. To kind of play a bit of a rover role. Like, I don't envision, you're not going to be a rover at 6'6", 6'7", but just that kind of guy kind of pick his gaps sometimes and rush over less athletic interior offensive linemen. So he's a guy that I'm upon watching his fact that I didn't watch too much of him prior to the draft, but in the day and a half since, he's a guy that watching his tape I'm pretty excited about now.
Yeah, it wasn't on my list originally of guys that I had looked at, and it's a very deep edge class, which is part of the issue with this. A lot of people had penciled Tavius Robinson in as a 4-3 end, and not really a guy who would adapt to a 3-4. I'm always of the opinion that you can anybody who would be a good 4-3 end, you can use in a 3-4 defense. You're just going to use them on a more selective basis.
Or just that rush. Or just that rush.
Yeah, you use him on the rush side, or you use him on obvious passing downs where you get the higher leverage value of it anyway on the inside, as you mentioned with a put down my feet type thing. One thing with Tavius Robinson is he's had a decent number of sacks so far in his college career, 4 forced fumbles in 2022, which was 3rd in the NCAAs and 1st in the SEC. So that's an excellent number. I want a guy who clubs for the football. I watched the Texas Tech game. They faced them in the Texas Bowl, and Texas Tech had 90 offensive snaps against Ole Miss in that game. Okay, so there were 90 defensive snaps to be played. He played 60 of them, which is really outstanding. He was stood up a couple times on short scoring runs, but he did have an outstanding club on a chase down play. It was a nice high motor play where Shuck rolled left and he hit him from behind. Nice club from behind, dislodged the football. He didn't see where it went, but his teammates did, and that was good. And he picked it up. They honestly, Texas Tech had a lot more success with him not on the field. They Ole Miss, was more effective with him on the field, obviously, and that's not surprising. He's one of their better players, but still, it was a lot of defensive snaps in that game for the Ole Miss defense in general. I think he probably starts as a situational pass rusher for the Ravens, a guy who has the quickness. You mentioned the games a little bit that he could be a good under guy on stunts. Certainly, he's a big body, but he also could be a good over guy. I think he has the quickness for it at 460. I think he's 466, right? On the 40. Look it up. I'll keep going here. Nice long arms. So that's a guy you want crossing the face of a guard and going into a shorter arm center a lot of the times. So creates all kinds of problems potentially. Could get shoulders turned. 2 guys blocking him at a 45-degree angle, which may create an opportunity for a blitzing linebacker. I do see him as a key chess piece there. In some ways, the underneath guy on stunts, as Calais Campbell gave the Ravens, as Justin Madubuike can give the Ravens, as even Patrick Queen did a couple of times in this last year, can be really valuable within McDonald's scheme or within the scheme any team can run, frankly, in terms of trying to get good opportunities for other players to get a good gap to rush through. So I think he's definitely a guy who could help with that. It's interesting. All of the population of Canada is right along the border with the United States, pretty much. There's a little bit in Alberta that's spread out a little bit more north to south, where they have some people in northern Alberta for the oil. But there's really not very much population. It's not within a very short distance of the United States. And he went to Guelph, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Collegiate Vocational Institute in Ontario. And then he moved on to the University of Guelph for a couple of years and before he moved on to Ole Miss. I looked at a map of Guelph, and all of Guelph, Hamilton, Toronto, all these other are within about 20 miles of each other. It's basically all one thing. Even if you go to Windsor, Ontario, which is right opposite Detroit, it's maybe an hour away or something. It's not very far. So you have all of things Buffalo. It's all within a very short distance of each other. It's greater Ontario, but it really shows you just how tightly grouped the schools are in that area, and frankly, all the population is. But anyway, a little bit of a side note there. Having a Canadian, my first thought was that maybe Brent Urban had played against him, and he hadn't. He said no, they're in another division, and they're so close on the map. Why not? But I hadn't seen him in either a hockey or a football context. But one other thing about Robinson I really like, off the edge, goes for the outside shoulder of the tackle very effectively. And that's something you like to see. And he had a good combination of being a guy who could bend, didn't have to run directly through that pressure, but played with heavy hands and got to the edge pretty effective. I see you might have something to say to that.
Yeah, I was saying it's really impressive when you see the guys that are that tall that can bend like the way he does. I mean, it's such an effective tool, especially when you're going against especially like shorter armed offensive linemen. Especially, I mean, you can get around him so quick and his wherewithal to go for the ball a lot of the time. You don't. Sometimes guys like maybe like a guy like Will Anderson might try to just drive through the quarterback, right? Instead of like Ray Lewis always tells Terrell Suggs, Sizzle, get the ball. Like, I don't care about you blowing up the quarterback. Go for that ball because you'll get credit for the sack and the forced fumble. So a guy who has that wherewithal, like I said, in the fourth round, like I said, even though I wasn't, like too much aware of him, like I said, upon watching his game, I'm like, okay, this guy has some really nice attributes to him that I really like. And said for a tall guy who, at 6'7", 6'6", and I looked up his 40, runs a 4.6, can bend that corner real nice and real quick.
Yeah, a lot of things to like, and he's going to be one of the really interesting players to watch in the preseason because he'll probably play mostly in the second half of games, and we'll see a guy who should stand out in bold relief. If he doesn't, honestly, something is wrong because the Ravens' defensive depth allows them to have a second half of big advantages against most teams, and I think for good reasons they like to jealously guard that meaningless, frankly, win streak in the preseason. It is still a lot more fun writing about games where the Ravens are dominating in the second half with their reserve players, because those are mostly the players I want to write about anyway during the preseason. I don't care what the ones do, frankly, in a very brief outing. So we should see a lot. He should be one of the really, if he's not one of the stars for the Ravens in the preseason, it would be a little bit of a disappointment given how he's going to be set up in the second half of games. Another guy I think really benefit from Chuck Smith to enhance his toolkit. Now, yeah, I see you nodding on that. That's a good one. Now, one of the problems with him is he's not he doesn't have bad functional strength by anything. I think he's a fairly powerful man, but 23 bench reps, arms a little under 34 inches that's on the probably a little bit off the efficient frontier of strength and length in terms of where I'd want it for a guy like this, but it's not terrible. It's just not great. Here's the problem. He's already almost 24 and a half. He'll be 20. Well, he turned 24 on January 3rd. That's an older player. And I know, he was late getting football. He was late. The problem is that really restricts the total amount of prime the guy is going to have. And in some ways it restricts the value you'll get out of him, even on the comp side. Because think about it. He'll be, when he goes to go to free agency, he'll be 28, and he will be less coveted at that age than the 26 and 27-year-olds who came out of the same draft with him. And some of them won't be at the same position, and defensive ends tend to be older, but by a year. But he's really older by 2 years, and it just makes him a little bit less of a hot commodity down the line. I know the last thing you want to be told is that the guy's not going to give us a compensatory pick, 2 days after we draft him. but it is the case that you when you draft older players, you have that risk of they've already hit their peak. That's number one, that they don't have as much room for growth in terms of physical strength and whatnot. And then also that you don't get as much out of them in terms of a second contract value.
Yeah, and so he didn't mention his age during his post draft conference call, but when he's talking about he has so much room to grow, obviously not really physically, because I think what the guys like men start kind of growing at like 25 or something like that, so he's like a year away from that. But as far as growing in his game, and especially I feel like that growth is going to be expedited by Dr. Rush. I really, I think we talked about this in previous shows. I love the investment that the Ravens have been making on their coaching and training staff the past few years to get that the athletic trainer over from the Titans I think his name was Dixon or something like that. They get that guy who was able, to turn around, not turn around, but help guys like Jeffrey Simmons and those guys who came into the league hurt, and that turn their careers around and get them off to a jump start is great. As far from the training aspect, and then from the coaching side, just having guys who are former gurus coming in and working with your young guys and even your older guys, helping your older guys take their game to a next level and helping your younger guys develop at an even quicker rate. So I feel like you're gonna see a lot of Ravens younger players kind of take off sooner. I feel like not only is this going to be a big year for Odafe Owe, but also David Ajabo. He's going to have a whole off season of being healthy with Dr. Rush, and in the whole full NFL off season, he's not going to be recovering from anything. And I just love the investment the Ravens are making in their coaching staff, and I feel like they're going to make some pretty nice dividends in the coming years, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, in the 1970s, you could invest in players, and you could pay them more. You could make trades. You could trade all your draft picks if you wanted to. If you're the Washington Redskins, that's what they did a lot of the times. They traded their players, and they built the over the hill gang and made Super Bowl VII against the Dolphins. Redskins teams for years after that were effective using a similar strategy. But what you can do in this day and age, the cap affects everybody equivalently. What doesn't affect everybody equivalently is your ability to spend money on positional coaches, on your facility, on other perks for the game. And that's why suite holders are still very important to NFL teams, is if they can create a fantastic experience for their players, a recruitable experience for their players, have coaches that the players can really learn from. That's coaches in particular. I agree with you. Are the real gold of the NFL right now. Great position coaches, and the Ravens have done it very well at some positions. Offensive line, I think they've done very well on the defensive line, and they've done well, generally speaking, in the secondary, and not as well at wide receiver. Very obviously, I think that's a place where it really hasn't worked out.
Yes, and that's why you go out and get a guy like Greg Lewis, who has a history of developing receivers with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he was a former NFL receiver himself. And so you go out and get a guy like Keith Williams, who's worked with the best of the best, with the Devontae Adams and the Tyreek Hills. Like Tyreek Hill was really raw as a route runner coming into the league. He was more of a running back than even a receiver, but over the years he developed more as a more complete receiver because he worked with guys like Keith Williams. Why teams don't like? It's crazy. Teams will bring in these gurus as consultants for training camp or for this and for that. But why wouldn't you want a guy on your like that on your staff full time who can continually work with your players as much as they're allowed to under the CBA? Like the fact that the Ravens are going out and getting these like your quote unquote gurus and expert positional coaches, this shows me that they're willing to tap into that gold mine where other teams are just like, oh yeah, hey, well, I want you to come by and teach your guys a couple things for training camp, and then maybe we'll talk to you again next year. I mean, the fact that the Dr. Rush has taken this long just to get a full-time gig is kind of crazy to me.
I think some of that might be money related. And here's what I'll say. If you're working in business in general, like you have an insurance company, it's a lot easier to bring in a consulting actuary and pay them for a temporary gig than it is to bring in a guy at a big high salary. And the reason is he disrupts your whole scale. So if you bring in a guy, and I don't know what Chuck Smith is making, but let's say Chuck Smith makes $2 million a year, and it might be $600,000. I really don't know. But if Rick Neuheisel was a guy, they had to hire out of college as a former head coach, and I think he was making about $1.5 million with the Ravens. He actually lived right around the corner from us, so I know what his house cost, and he's a guy who would have been I'll just say a guy like that would stress your other people who are coaching and hoping to do better at what they do. So if Chuck Smith comes in and he makes a ton of money, it's easier to pay him that money as a consultant, where his job's just temporary. He won't be here next year, or if he does, he'll be back as a consultant kind of thing. It's easier to pay that money on a temporary basis than it is on a permanent basis.
Yeah, and I understand if you're a family like like the who owns the Bengals, the Brown family. I think it is who own the Bengals, and like where your only money is tied up in the team. Yeah. But for a guy like Steve Bisciotti, who's that's not his main source of income. Or other teams like that who or the Cowboys, who Jerry's a former oil tycoon or whatever. Guys like that, I think we're talking about billionaires here. You tell me a billionaire can't spare a couple $100,000, even a couple million to help develop his young players at premium positions. It'd be different if you're talking about an inside linebackers coach, right? Or right. Or your kicking coach. I don't know how much they're paying Randy. I think it was Randy Brown, right? The kicking coach. Even though he'll develop the best kicker in NFL history, Justin Tucker, you're not going to pay that guy hand over fist. But a guy who's gonna be able to come in and train your premium pass rushers or your top flight DBs or your quarterback, or like Jeff Stoutland. I mean, anybody who listens to any any football podcast, you probably hear Jeff Stoutland's name like 101 times. Because the Eagles offensive line coach, who's he's kind of the new Dante Scarnecchia as far as the top tier offensive line coach. Mm-hmm. Although I'd argue Joe D is up there. Joe D
doing a great job.
Yeah, he's doing a great job. Yeah, doing excellent. But like I said, like you can't. To me, you can't overpay for greatness when it comes to coaching, because like in the long run, it's going to save you money. If you think about it, if you have a coach who's good at developing these kind of positional players, and you can pay them, I won't say comparable to a coordinator, but you don't have to. Be tempted to keep those guys on so many guys on high contracts, because if you have a guy that can develop, like, hey, we'll take this traits guy and have this guy develop him, and we won't have to pay, overpay for a Samson Ebukam or a Derek Rivers or something like that.
I mean, it's a legitimate point, and I think the positional coaching is really worth it. I think it probably helps to have a culture which says, don't ask anybody else what their salary is. We don't take kindly to that, but it doesn't matter. Everybody's going to talk. Everybody's going to know. Everybody's going to talk. There's going to be websites out there that'll have it. It doesn't matter. But let me frame this up a little differently, because I don't think I really made my point as cogently as I should have. If there's $250 million in cap, that means the owners basically have $250 million of revenue also under the revenue sharing agreement from which to run their organization and derive profit. So let's say an owner wants to make $50 million of profit in a typical year. And I know Bisciotti at one point was complaining that he was making about as much running the team as his inside linebacker was making when Ray Lewis was here. So it could be, it honestly could be that they make less than $50 million a year in a profit. It could be $20 million. And it could be some owners are running their team at a loss. It adds up pretty quickly if you give one of your assistant coaches, one of your position-specific coaches, $1 extra million, and you say, well, we can't afford not to do it, kind of thing, that you might end up paying 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 guys an extra million because they know what's going on in a relative sense. Now, all of that's negotiable, and everybody has to fit in under Harbaugh, who I don't know exactly what he makes per year, but it's probably close to 10 million, maybe a little bit more in terms of what he is. It becomes a more difficult puzzle to solve in terms of relative salaries. If you're out there and you've run a department ever where you had a bunch of high-priced employees, IT is a perfect example where the older people tend to get overpaid, and younger people, then you have to fit their salaries in, and the older people can get upset if the younger people are making more than them, but that may really be in terms of productivity, what's appropriate. Same kind of dynamic exists in the coaching world, and it might be very difficult to keep everybody relativized and still, have a decent profit margin for the owner. It does ultimately have to come out of their pocket. But you make a good point that, hey, Steve Bisciotti is not a Brown who has to be concerned about the football operation maintaining his family wealth.
Yeah, and like you said, I'm not saying do that for every coach, but I'm saying like you're not gonna you probably want to pay your defensive line coach or your offensive line coach or your quarterbacks coach more than you're paying your running backs coach. Like I'm not saying that running back coaches salaries don't matter, aren't as meaningful, but as far as like if you coach a premium position and you do that at an elite level and you're turning out elite guys or even upper echelon guys, like they said defensive line coaches, pass rush specialists, stuff like that, I'd be willing to fork over a little bit more. Like I said, I'm not a millionaire or billionaire or whatever, but I just feel like those guys are well worth the investment.
Yeah. All right, outstanding. So one of the things that I just want to say about Tavius is he's a 4th round pick. He really needs to contribute immediately at his age. He's not a guy that you say, well, he needs a year in the NFL weight room, and then we could talk about him as a project for next year. If he's not on the field in 2023 to a fair degree, the pick won't have been completely wasted, but it will not have been maximized if that's the case.
No, I think he's going to get the Za'Darius Smith treatment. He's going to be on the field. I wouldn't say early and often, but like on a regular rotating basis this year. I just feel like the Ravens are going to be in position where they're going to want to platoon those guys, keep those guys fresh, and I feel like they're going to be a lot of the defense is going to be a lot of down and distance situations. I mean, just having Roquan, man, like I said, I almost want to hey, we forgot to talk about second round pick. That's Roquan Smith, because like it's like having him as that field general and that transformative presence, as far as the guy that the tide races all ships kind of guy, and just being that field general in the middle and kind of like he's going to stop a lot of plays before they can happen.
All right, let's move on. Round 5, number 157. The Ravens, definitely one of the controversial picks of the draft, I'd say, finally picked up their cornerback. It's Caillou Blue Kelly of Stanford. 6 foot 191, a 4.52 40. 32-inch arms are nice for a cornerback. That's a good length, obviously. And he won't turn 22 until later on in May. So one of the younger corners, not super young, but certainly not an older player. Your thoughts on Caillou?
I think he's a solid. I wouldn't say developmental guy, but kind of a developmental guy. Like his junior tape was better than his senior tape, and the Ravens even said as much. He even admitted as much. I think it was Blackburn, the director of college scouting, who was saying that he's a guy that could have been a day 2 pick had he come out last year in last year's draft. And he talked about how last year he only faced about the total of 25 snaps in man, and a big emphasis for him at the Senior Bowl, showing coaches that his junior year wasn't a fluke and that he could still do all those things and make all those plays. So he's a guy that he was nominated senior. He was elected a Senior Bowl National Player of the Week for the national team. So that that kind of stuff goes along. Ravens love that kind of stuff. They pull from I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that they draft at least 1 or 2 Senior Bowl players every year. They love those guys that are more experienced guys that they can get an early look, a more hands-on look on early in the process. And so they've clearly taken it. And they said that he's a guy that they've been watching for a couple of years now. Thought he was going to come out last year. So he's a guy that the Ravens are fairly versed in, and they believe he's closer to that 2021 player than the 2022 player that didn't put up as impressive numbers in coverage or overall.
I mean, it's nice that that's a realization. I have additional problems with his game because other than the Senior Bowl performance, there's not a standout element of his game. And so the 4.52 speed is a problem. And you'd want to have offsetting characteristics. If you were the greatest ball hawk of all time, you'd love to have that. Or if he even was a guy who had a wonderful ball skills record, contested for every catch, like nobody's business. If you look at his actual performance statistics, they're not good. 8.9 yards per target in 2022, but 8.4 for his career. So even including his good 21 season, he's not that good in terms of his yards per target in his career. That's a number a lot of receivers would be very happy to get. And one new receiver to the Ravens, Odell Beckham, he'd take either of those numbers. And if he wouldn't, he's crazy. I'll take it for him. So those are numbers certainly that a lot of receivers would like. 10 TDs, 3 interceptions career, 97.5 passer rating against. Now, not everybody is Devon Witherspoon and has a 25.3 passer rating against. And, most of the draftable cornerbacks have a quarterback rating against that's probably in the 70s or the 60s or even the 50s. It's very rare to see guys who are somewhat higher than that. There are a couple. I'm not saying they're not a couple, but the guys who were drafted, equal or before Caillou, I don't think anybody's got a 97.5 career passer rating against. So that's not good. He does have solid size and length. He has not been able to translate that into ball production, which is just an okay 8.9% pass defense rate for his entire career. Again, I'm not crazy about that. I'm trying to figure out what it is that the Ravens loved about him so much other than the Senior Bowl.
I'll tell you. They told the story about this. First time they watched him was going against Drake London, and I think the year before in 2021 during his really good season. And basically they saw the performance he had against Drake London. And it was like, man, this guy's going toe for toe with a projected top 10 pick. And then this past season, his performances against Jordan Addison were a thing that people were really harping on after he got picked. So I think that what the Ravens like is his potential and his ability to play big against the better competition. A guy who's not going to shy away from a challenge, a guy who's going to try his best to improve. I mean, he was essentially a 4-year starter in college. And I think he started off as a special teams guy early on. He's going to be playing a lot of special teams for the Ravens, especially early on. But he's a guy that I feel like he could be a nice developmental prospect. He could turn into a solid cornerback depth for during his tenure as a Raven and be a really good special teams player.
I mean, it resets the clock at cornerback. There's some positives about that, and I like the answer because it's maybe an answer to the question that's legitimate. Is if he's always going up against an opponent number one receiver, that is a reason to expect results that are not as good. It's just the results are not very good. The college, production against him has been way too good for the typical drafted cornerback. He's not the most physical man defender you'll see. He's not a Ike Taylor, Jimmy Smith, bump the guy out of bounds all the way down the sidelines guy. He's more of an off corner in terms of what I see. Not really a big press guy, although he probably has the size to do that. And maybe that's something the Ravens really like about him. I don't think he reads the QB, honestly, all that well. But I'm looking for this feature that the Ravens like. Doesn't have a good missed tackle rate, by the way, either. I'm looking for the feature that the Ravens like. They obviously like the Senior Bowl, and they probably loved, as you mentioned, the fact that he went up 1-for-1 against some of the best receivers probably that the other team could put out there, and maybe that was something. So the other part I want to discuss, perhaps briefly, is that the Ravens have a fairly deep set of cornerbacks right now that they don't know exactly what they have. JAD, developmental prospect. Brandon Stevens, frankly, in a lot of ways, they don't know exactly what they have yet.
Pepe Williams.
Yeah, I mean, a slot guy, is he going to be able to hold up? I mean, they couldn't continue to give him the chance at slot corner, and they had to put Hamilton there instead this last year. It wasn't really a choice, but he just represented one of the best 11 they could put on the field, and they dealt with both the assets and the shortcomings that are very different from a typical slot corner that Hamilton gives you.
Yeah. Pepe kind of had a trial by fire. I mean, both him and JAD did. I mean, JAD, they had to pull him. Yeah, they had to pull him from that game. It was like, dude, Devin. I mean, it was the Parker was eating his lunch for like a whole half. So they had to look, man, you're a liability out there. So both of those guys. The worst thing that could happen with those guys as rookies was Fuller going down, and then Marcus Peters not being up to snuff right away. And they weren't ready for those high leverage snaps early on, and they were guys that needed to be eased into it. I definitely think eliminating that fourth preseason game kind of hurts guys like that. Guys who need some like as much live reps as they can heading into the season. And so I think I like the Ravens are taking more more swings and more darts at that position, hoping that one of them rises to the challenge. Because after all, all three of those guys are day 3 picks, so it's not like you spend like a third or fourth rounder. Fourth rounder, like a third or second round or even first round pick on those guys. And so they're kind of like anything. I wouldn't say anything on day 3 is kind of a dart throw, but they're less value picks as say. But then again, Brandon Stevens was a third round pick.
Day 2 pick, yeah.
He was, even though he was, albeit at the bottom of the third. Essentially some fourth round guys sometimes get reached for at the bottom of the third. But still, he's a guy that also looked like Brandon Stevens. He's a guy who's flashed at times last season. He made some nice high leverage plays last season, but he's not a guy that I'm confident in being our cornerback 2 heading into 2023. I think he's going to be a solid backup as long as they leave him at corner and stop trying to fiddle him around with other positions in the secondary.
Well, so, let's talk about that for just a second, because I think that's going to be one of the key things is what they do with Stevens. I think he stays at outside corner. I hope they give him the whole year to try and get it figured out. But I also don't want to see him on the field for many snaps. And I'm going to be more comfortable if he's the 4th outside corner than if he's the 3rd outside corner. And I definitely don't want him to be the 2nd outside corner where you're starting him. If they they'll bring in a veteran, whether it's Rock Yassin or whether it's Peters. It could be both, or it could be a guy they bring in a veteran slot if they really want to move Hamilton back off the ball. But I think they're going to bring in 2 cornerbacks that they sign here. Wouldn't have any problem if it were those 2 specifically. They'll probably both of them will want to start, and it's less likely that that'll actually be the way. But here's the issue: I don't know if they can sort through these guys in a year to decide who's the next guy, because I don't know that we really want them on the field very often. So can they decide between Brandon Stevens, JAD, and Caillou Blue Killy? Let's just start with that group. Forget about Daryl Worley, who they seem to like more than any of those guys, by the way. And the fact that they had 18 or so transactions on him last year tell you
I know,
they really
crazy.
like who Daryl Worley is. They know he has value, and they stick him in there. Kayvon Seymour is still around. Now, I don't think he's going to be taking an outside corner role for the Ravens. He's really more of a special teams guy, but he definitely is an emergency corner. And I can't really say at this point that I don't want him on the field more than JAD.
Yeah, like Daryl Worley's a guy who, like, he knows what he's doing at all times. It's just a talent thing, man. With Daryl Worley, he's a guy who's like he's a smart player, and he's even made some nice instinctive plays. And it's just like going up against guys like Jamar Chase is a mismatch. There's a clear talent gap between him and, like, he's good on the team's second or third receiver, but when he's forced into action against or finds himself lined up against an upper echelon receiver like a T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, I wouldn't say 9 times out of 10 he's gonna get posterized, but the odds of him making a play and the other guy and the other guy not coming down with the catch is much lower.
Certainly, there was a lot that was said in the comments that Wink made after leaving the team. Obviously, the easiest way to answer a question, which is a bad reflection on you, is to make something funny. What's your greatest weakness? Chocolate. You're supposed to say in an interview. They ask Wink, what did you learn from the lousy season you had last year? Don't hire your corners from DoorDash. That it just, first of all,
wow,
it throws it all on the players and not on the thing. So I thought he got the laugh he was hoping for out of the thing. In terms of responsibility points, it wasn't as good an answer. And,
no, he left like he didn't do guys like Chris Westry and those guys. He did those guys a major disservice with all the zero pressures he called and all our pressures. I mean, there were times I'd be begging on my knees, Ken, like, oh, please don't send the house. Please don't send the house. You cannot leave Chris Westry 1-on-1. I don't care if it is against Marquise Goodwin or whoever that guy was against Chicago that he gave up the long touchdown to. But I was just like, you don't have the kind of personnel to be taking those kind of dice rolls, man. Like at a certain point, it comes down like, yeah, you wish you get better players, and you don't have the same. You can't call the plays like you have your number ones and your top tier guys in there if they're not in there. And even then, sometimes you don't want to leave those guys, at a disadvantage, especially in high leverage downs. So I like the way that McDonald kind of got into his groove, and especially second half of the season, and he's really dialing up stuff and really kind of like being strategically aggressive instead of just all out blitz.
Yeah, honestly, I have a lot more respect for Wink than that. I think that Wink did a good job of adapting by week to each team in terms of that. He had a bias towards aggression, sure. That was kind of his calling card, and the Ravens are good with it. But I agree. McDonald probably did more with more, is what I'll say about this last year.
Yeah,
in terms of having Roquan for starters and getting the defense really turned around at midseason.
Yeah. I love what everything the week was doing. It was just his last season when you didn't have the personnel to be as aggressive as you're accustomed to being. You got to dial it back a little bit, man.
All right, so Kelly, I think we've kind of beaten the topic to death. It does kind of the Ravens do have an ongoing kind of glut at corner they have to work through, and they don't have a long time to work through it. They're going to have some practice squad players who are generated from the current set of people they have. Or Darius Washington, another player we haven't really discussed, but coming up on, I think he's year 3 this year. Yes, year 3. Yeah. They haven't really figured out what his role is with the team either. So they've got a lot to figure out in the preseason, even if they get the veteran corners they want. And
I was gonna say Caillou's dad played in the league too, for running like 10 years and won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. And he actually, like the same year they won Super Bowl in 2002, his dad led the tied Charles Woodson for the league in picks. He had eight interceptions that year. So I was like, man, your dad was quite the ball hawk in his career.
What happened to you?
Did you not inherit the hands or something, or what's going on? Did your dad get you on the junk machine? So I'd like to see him improve that area of his game. And he talked about that area of his game in his conference call with the media. He talked about how he wants to be more physical, and how he wants to kind of like learn from a guy like Marlon Humphrey, even though they're not the same size, but still kind of improve on the physicality aspect of his game, which I think would be good too. But like I said, I think being around a guy like Marlon would do wonders for him. But if they bring a guy like Marcus Peters back, I think he'd be great for a great mentor to a young corner like that too.
All right, outstanding. So we move on here. Let's move on to round 6 with the most difficult to pronounce name in the entire draft. And I'll try once here. Salah Amuvai Laulu, and that's in the ballpark.
You actually did good. Yeah. So I know his uncle. His uncle is actually is a football legend up here in Alaska, Junior Amuvai. That's how you pronounce the first half of his name. And so yeah, I think he was actually the guy we just drafted. I think what Eric said. I'm just gonna call him Salah. So he's a guy that Coach D liked, and I think he was actually an Alaskan-born guy too. Even though he ended up moving out of state, but he's a guy that's I believe was born in Alaska. But yeah, his uncle played in the league, played for the Jets and I think a couple other teams. And he's a guy who's he's clearly a developmental prospect, kind of guy, but a guy with a whole lot of upside, and played some guard, played some tackle in college, primarily at right tackle. But he's a guy that has the size and the positional flexibility that the Ravens really covet, especially in those late round picks. I mean, they have going back in their history, they have a propensity for drafting and developing these later round guys. You got the Ryan Jensens and the Rick Wagners and the Bradley Bosemans.
Mm-hmm. All good examples of taking late round guys. That's for sure. And I like the idea of calling him Mal. And Salah sounds right, but MAL. He's bad, and that's not that he's a bad player. He's a bad man. You want that. Anyway, older player again. He'll be 24 in May here, and 34.5-inch arms at 6'6". I love. That's something that will serve him well no matter where he plays. Obviously, on the offensive line, he'll be helped by that. 18 bench reps. Now, he is too big a dude. Too much of his game is strength-based for him to be at 18 bench strength, even with those longer arms. If he were 23, I'd say, okay, it's a matter of the arm length is held him back. That's still in the efficient frontier of length and strength. He's not on it at 18 bench reps, and that's obviously a problem for him. One of the things about him, and just watch a little bit of him from his play this last year. He's a right tackle who uses his hands reasonably well. I'd say he tries to punch. He uses his hands independently, which, by the way, you don't see from everybody. There's a lot of non-independent hand users who are relatively new to the game, and they burst up with both arms always at the same time, but they punch out with both arms, always try to hit the defensive lineman with both at the same time. I call that using both flippers at the same time in pinball. And you want to tell a really bad pinball player, they use both flippers at the same time all the time. Anyway, Salah, we'll call him, has a better way of trying to deliver an independent punch, but he's just not strong enough currently to deliver the kind of force he needs to be effective. He gets himself off balance doing it sometimes too. So that's something I don't like. Penalized 10 times as a senior, 22 times in 2007 college snaps. Now it does happen. There are some worse players at that, but his is really bad. I look at the Ravens have a UDFA who has an unbelievable penalty record that we'll get into on the next show we're doing, Josh. But that's really a lot of penalties still. It's a Michael Orr level. It's mostly false starts. It's not a lot of decline penalties, which is something that actually is good. You don't want to have option penalties. for the most part. So it is a lot of false starts. If you look at how the guy goes out at a level 2, and you see this as bigs against smalls, on screen passes in particular, he's a big time lunger. So it is kind of natural. You're trying to have an effect on a smaller man, and they're usually much more adept at running around you when you're his size. And he ends up being a little bit of a lunger. Guy can take himself off his own feet in level 2. His mirror is okay, I would say, as a tackle. One thing you look for is that he's not clicking his heels together. He doesn't want to go back to Kansas. You put your heels together at tackle, not maintaining that wide, short, choppy steps left to right. You put yourself at risk of getting off balance very easily from that. Most of his problems are off balance front to back, not laterally. And that's actually very important for pass blocking. It makes him a better pass blocker, that he has some of that lateral mirroring ability, as opposed to the punch and losing his balance from front to back.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy who's, like I said, who has like a lot of really appealing qualities, and like I feel like all the deficiencies in this game can be fixed and corrected with coaching. And it's not like he's a guy who can't do these things, who can't get stronger, who can't refine his technique. This guy's going to take some time to do that. And like when you're drafting a guy, taking a guy in the 6th round, he's I would say he's basically a dart throw, but he's kind of like shot in the dark, kind of doing it. This is a guy, 6th or 7th round is kind of made for guys, but one made for specialists. That's when you should be targeting your punters, your long snappers, and your kickers, but also guys whose traits that you love and that you think you can develop into a good rotational piece, if not a quality starter. That's the guy where a guy like Jordan Mailata for the Eagles was taken after not even playing football. He was a rugby player all his life up until he got taken. Now he's one of the better left tackles in the league. So I think like this is like for a player with his size, his rare size, rare length, and physical attributes. This was like the right part of the draft to target a guy like that. And you can clearly tell that Joe D was. I don't know if you saw the
yes.
the guy.
Very
Joe
excited.
D is very excited about this guy. And if Joe D's excited, I'm excited. And I plan on talking to his uncle for an article I'm going to write about the last connections to the draft thing, and I'll see if I can maybe even get a word with him too. But he's a prospect that I'm pretty excited about. That's just because he has Alaska roots, but because of all things we just got done talking about. And if Jody's excited, I'm excited, and I feel like he could be a guy who could be a really good depth piece, if not even potentially a starter. And of course not this year. But you never know. He could get thrust into the fire. Injuries happen all the time, and he's not gonna be a guy who's not. I feel like he's definitely gonna be on the team.
Yeah, I hope he's not thrust into the fire this year. I think he's at least a year away. And you talk about guys who need to be in an NFL weight room. He's 24. This shouldn't be true of him. He really should have his grown man strength, but he doesn't. And it's unfortunately he really needs to get it together pretty quickly. He's got, I think, a year. If things did not work out over the course of a year that he's not ready to go for the 2024 season, I'd be really upset by it. I mean, it would mean the pick had failed. It's a round 6 pick, but it's not the end of the world, but it's also not good. I hate the term dart throw or lottery ticket with regard to draft picks in the later round. What I want to say, it's a lower percentage to succeed, or it's a lower than 50% chance to succeed. But the Ravens, and they're really going to have to lean on this, their drafting success is what this organization has as its biggest asset. And, how I look at it is, the Ravens only have a 35% chance to make a 6th-round draft pick turn into something that can be useful for them, whereas other teams have a 10% chance or a 14% chance of that happening. That's the Ravens' edge right there. That difference in the probability of that 6th-round pick working out is the Ravens' edge, and they've had some really good players, come out of these rounds. And is it a lottery ticket? That's just the wrong characterization. It's more like the difference between two poker players of vastly different skill levels, each buying an entry into the World Series of Poker. The player who's the better player is getting much better value for that entry fee than I am, for example. So anyway, I kind of dislike the lottery ticket or the dart throw or whatever. It's it doesn't have a super high probability of succeeding, but if it does, I mean, the Ravens have had a fair number of them that have worked out. And when it does, it could work out very well. It did with Carlos Thomas, Chuck Clark, etc.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I was just talking to somebody about, like, you you couldn't ask for a better landing spot than the Ravens if you're a late round pick looking to develop and get your career jump started and have a place that's willing to take the time to develop you. I don't think they're going to bail on him like they did a guy like Robert Myers all those years ago. Quadzilla, but he's the guy I feel like they're going to stick with, and I'm really going to have a good chance to develop. Like I said, anybody that Jody's excited about, I know has got a shot in this league.
All right, well, that's fair, and I feel the same way in terms of that. And if he's coachable, then Jody's really going to be able to help him, I hope. So, and hopefully the strength coaches as well. Let's go ahead and move on to a guy I absolutely love. The Ravens got in round 7, and I'm sorry, everybody, he's got his hands together here. Josh loves him too. It's pretty clear. But I'll say that very interesting pick. First of all, we had the live stream going, and we cut off at 199 because I just didn't see any way the Ravens would be trading back in. And of course, kind of just like the surprise of drafting Lamar Jackson in 2018 when they got back into the first round late on that night, and I'd already gone to sleep at that point. Disappointed with the loss of Derwin James and the trades downs to eventually get Hurst. That's it's just one of those things. But they trade back in, use next year's 6th to pick up Andrew Voorhees, a guard from USC. Start us off.
My man, I mean, he was one of coming into the pre-draft process, because I watched quite a few USC games, keeping tabs on another former Alaskan prospect that ended up landing with the Miami Dolphins, Brandon Peely. But yeah, Voorhees, man, I mean, just talking about the guy's last name, talking about Jason Voorhees. I mean, he's a dude that can put you in a body bag. I mean, I love his toughness. Love his grit. He's a guy that's kind of overcame some injuries in college, so he's kind of accustomed to this grind and overcoming it. But he's a guy who I really feel like is a fundamentally sound prospect and a powerful guy. I mean, he put up more reps than anybody at the combine this year, with 38 reps with a torn ACL. I mean, as a former powerlifter myself, man, so much of your power and balance when you're on the bench, comes from your stance. You when you're pushing off with your legs. You can feel it in your quads, and even though you're using your arms, like your whole body's kind of going into pushing that weight off. For him to be on one leg and put up 38 reps, I mean, I don't even know if I could put up 10. I still lift from time to time, but I don't even know if I could put up 10. With one leg, kind of straightened out because I didn't have my ligaments attached to each other. So I mean that alone is pretty impressive, and I feel like he's a guy that's of course we're not gonna see him on the field this year, but he's a dude I feel like can pay major dividends as soon as 2024.
Yeah, that was a remarkable bench performance. By the way, there were only 10 guys who had 30 reps. He had 38, and the next highest was 34, Mazzie Smith and Jovan Gwynn. So for him to do 38 under those conditions is remarkable. There are people who would poo-poo it because he's got 32 and an 1/8-inch arms. I wouldn't at all do that. I think it's more than on the efficient frontier. It's an outlier to the efficient frontier still of length and strength. He is an older player to start with. He was born 1/21/99, so he's already over 24. He's already 24 if you talk about it that way. He'll see his first action for the Ravens, his first regular season action, when he's 25.7. So he's going to be closing in on his 26th birthday when he first touches the field for the Baltimore Ravens, because it's going to be a complete redshirt year, obviously, for him. It'll be a rehab year that's very important. And I think, probably he's in a great place to do it. I almost think that he's so far ahead of the curve in terms of his functional strength on the field. That's actually something he won't have to worry about as much. Just rehab the hell out of that knee, get it ready to go. And then I hope he's a guy who can work on his technique a little bit, learn some of the other elements of offensive line play, and certainly learn elements of offensive line scheme by being in the room that he can, hit the ground running in 2024. a few things about his career at USC. So he played left guard in 2022. That's probably where he will end up with the Ravens in 2024, but it's not impossible that he's Kevin Zeitler's replacement right out of the chute. Okay. Now, he's not ideal on the right side for some reasons, length being the primary one. But on the other hand, he's got that tremendous functional strength, which will allow him to rotate the defensive tackle. You have to pivot that player through there and open the front gate for your right-handed run game. He is a great guy to do that. I think Ben Cleveland, trained up, could possibly also be another guy. I don't think there's anybody else currently on the Ravens who it really would make sense to consider for that role. It's not that somebody might not emerge, from this. It's not, maybe Saleh becomes a guy who, has enough strength after a year that he could compete for that job. But I think, and maybe Faalele is a guy who could be somebody you want at that position. They're talking about Faalele at left guard, competing for that spot, but that's because Zeitler is entrenched. He's obviously not losing his job. If Zeitler leaves, and I think there's probably a pretty good chance because the Ravens will again be looking at how to save money after 2023. Then they're going to have to figure out which of these young guys can do it. And they'll probably have a kind of a cloudy guard picture on both sides. But I think Voorhees, if I had to bet right now, would be the guy I think will step in at right guard and be the one from the very start of 2024.
Yeah, I think in the perfect world, given that Kevin Zeitler is entering the final year of his deal, right? I think he signed a 3-year deal in 2020 after he got released. 2020 or 2021. It was 2021. 2021 because 2021, 2022, 2023. Yeah, so this is the last year of his deal. And in the perfect world, I feel like the Ravens would love to develop Saleh and then have Voorhees return, and those potentially could compete with Ben Cleveland to be your starting right and left guards going forward on expensive contracts. But Voorhees is a guy I'm super excited about, and I'd love for him and Saleh, because Saleh, I saw that he projects. That some people were saying he projects better at guard, anyways. So, both of those guys, I feel like would definitely benefit from kind of being Zeitler kind of taking them under his wing, and like I said, being that guy that kind of coaches them up both on the field and in the locker room. And I'm excited about both those guys. But Voorhees, just like the tremendous value. Like I said, I know he's an older player and all that, but he was one of my guys that early in the pre-draft process that I was like really excited about. I'm like, yeah, this could be a guy that potential Ben Powers replacement. Right off the bat, plug and play starter on that left side. He was AP All-American. I think he started 11 games. He missed like a couple games due to injury. But he's a guy that I was like, man, like when he's healthy, plug and play starter, plug and play from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about his play on the field because I had a lot of fun watching his tape. And there's even there is a cut up out there, and I don't remember who is the internet guy, analyst, whatever you want to call him, that did it. But I think the very first play, he wants to talk about the nasty streak that Andrew Voorhees has, and it ends up being one of the things I think Andrew Voorhees really needs to watch about his play. He's going up against a defensive tackle who's a 3-tech, I believe, on the play, and he dominates him and throws him to the ground. The problem is he wants to finish him so badly, he finishes him into the legs, the back of the legs of the left tackle. Okay, and it was an important play. It's Cortland Ford, who wears number 74, who played left tackle. Cortland Ford missed the next 2 weeks. Okay, and it looked a lot scarier than that, by the way, in terms of this. The guy kept running that back and showing that nasty streak. And I'm like, you really do not want that. Okay, I want a guy who finishes a guy downfield, pancakes and falls on top of him if you're driving him to level 2. But be careful with your own.
Kyle Linderbaum.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kyler Linderbaum, sure, if he's going up against a smaller player or a defensive tackle, if he gets a good pitch off the line of scrimmage on a double team initially, and Ben Cleveland will take him for a ride down the field and then flop on top of him. You have my blessing. But
we don't want no Ronnie Stanley getting hurt out here. Exactly. The guy's been rolled up on way too much in his career already. But yeah, like I said, we don't want no Trevor Penning situation. I mean that guy. That guy was a character last year. I'm glad the Ravens didn't take him as their next right tackle of the future. But yeah, he's a guy that I appreciate the nastiness and like the whole Jason Voorhees thing, kind of finishing a guy. But yeah, that's definitely a thing you got to keep an eye on, and don't want to see that at the next level.
Very well built top to bottom. He's 6'6", 310, so he's got some of the height, some of the issues that come with height. Does not necessarily keep his pad level low enough, but he's so freaking strong. You see upper body strength, lower body strength, a ton of upper body strength. And he's definitely got the hands that redirect a defensive tackle in a very rare way. And I don't say that lightly. There are not a lot of guys who can easily turn a defensive tackle in the NFL alone. Okay, meaning they don't need a double team to do it. He'll just turn the guy and start pushing him on his own. And I thought seeing that even at the collegiate level, very impressed by it. As good he is at that component of run blocking, he's got very balanced lateral movement. I thought he did a very good job as a pass blocker in terms of having a good mirror. His game is much more about upper body strength than bend. There are a lot of one of the criticisms of him generally, and I don't know that I observed this too much on tape, is that he kind of leaves his chest a little bit exposed, gets too high, and can give other defensive tackles an opportunity to stand him up and bull him a little bit. I saw a guy who re-anchored extremely well when he got moved back. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was going to be my next thing. Like you were saying, typically with tall guys, you can get going against, especially shorter defensive linemen, they can get up underneath your pads and kind of pull you. But if you have a guy who can re-anchor almost as quickly as you try to jack him up, I mean, you reach a stalemate, and at that point, he's already won the rep because the ball's gone. So he's a guy who has that older player already has his grown man strength already came in. He knows how to use it well to his advantage. And like I said, I can't wait. I don't want to fast forward to next year because I feel like the Ravens are going to do special things this year. But the future of the Ravens interior offensive line, I feel is very bright with some of these picks. And I feel like Voorhees, Linderbaum, and potentially even Salah, man, it could be the Ravens starting lineup in 2024 and beyond.
It really makes sense, I think, that they stick with bigs next to Linderbaum on either side. I mean, Linderbaum is definitely a smaller guy, and to get the most out of him, you want him helping on a combination block at the line of scrimmage, moving up to level 2, and finding that second block. And Linderbaum will do that best if he's working next to mountains like Cleveland, like Salah, like Zeitler. It plays a lot bigger than his size, really, but like Zeitler in terms of that, and like Voorhees. So great set of options. Agree with you completely with that last comment. I did want to say, in terms of pulls, which is another thing I try and look at, I had a limited number of pulls that I was looking at. And I thought when the slot was set, he did a very good job of maintaining his momentum. That's something I want to see with guards in general, that they don't, first of all, it usually boils down to decisiveness in maintaining your momentum. So you come through that, you're started at left guard, you come through the slot appropriate to the play. And that's it oftentimes is on the right side of the right guard. I want to see him be able to process very quickly and make his decision on the run and hit the available defender that he's supposed to hit, and also to make good choices on whether he wants to wait or U-turn for a defensive lineman who got off his block further down the line of scrimmage and is making progress. A linebacker who's scraping is not usually a guy he's directly responsible for, but it can be a linebacker who's already in the hole for sure. Or he's just willing to leave that block behind and say, I need to get that safety right there. Or even I need to get that corner. I thought he did a very good job of not getting befuddled by U-turn opportunities. Make that U-turn block. And oftentimes it's not even a matter of there's a great block to be made. There's no other block to be made. And so he gives up his momentum, and he often a player can get stuck in the hole, and the player from the outside can then contain that hole more effectively against the runner. So I saw in Voorhees, I thought he made good judgments while he was pulling on the fairly limited set of runs I saw. And just from that, I think it's something the Ravens will coach up technique wise. And I think he's got all of the other measurables that you'd want to be able to pull, given what the Ravens have been able to do with players like Bozeman over the years in terms of making them into really good pullers. Good finisher, like we said. I guess the last thing I want to say about him, and the last thing I really want to say for the night here, is that the Ravens used a 6th round selection from him in 2024. And it's nice to say that he's a steal as a 2024 draft pick as a 6, and you can just do that. It's not quite that simple because they only get him for 3 years, beginning 2024. I like to think of him as a mini Ajabo pick that could be even of greater value given the relative capital used. I mean, he could be a better player than Ajabo. Frankly, we really don't know at this point. But he could certainly be a greater value because the pick used on Ajabo was still a very valuable one. It would have been the Ravens' second biggest pick in this draft. And the pick used on Voorhees is only a 6.
Yeah, yeah. So I was thinking about that at the time too. I was like, man, I mean, like to get a guy of his caliber and ability when healthy for the price of I don't like to belittle the any draft because you never know what it could be in any given year. But to get a guy who if healthy would have been like I saw him projected that to go as high as 2nd round. Yep. To get a guy who could have been like a latest 3rd round pick for the price of a 6th rounder in next year's draft or just a late day 3 pick period, I think is tremendous value. And I mean, and Eric DeCosta even said it in his little quote they posted on the team website. We envision this guy playing winning football for us in the years to come because they already know. Like they're right here with me and you, Ken. They already know this guy is going to be the future either left or right guard for the Ravens.
So, looking at this as a 7th round pick, I have said this before about players. I said it about Geno Stone when he got drafted, but there's a reasonable chance he ends up being the best 7th round selection in team history. Going to go through the competition right now. Whole bunch of guys who didn't work out, including some guys who never played in the league. Ralph Staten, who had 5 interceptions for the Ravens and was a heck of a safety in their early years, started for about a year and a half at safety for them. Was a dime back at one point as well. So he's one guy. Campanaro doesn't quite count because he got re-signed to the team. So you kind of gave up on all the draft value as soon as you cut the guy and somebody else picks him up. So that's not really, it wouldn't be really fair to say was, but honestly, the bar is not very high with Campanaro in terms of what Voorhees could do for this team in a relative sense. D'Angelo Tyson, who played on the Super Bowl team in 2000, was a fine rotational defensive lineman for a while for the Ravens. Then he went back to the practice squad. Honestly, the Ravens got decent value out of him, but not absurdly high. And then there's Stone himself, and he also was cut, went to the Texans, re-signed, and he ended up being a hell of a player, obviously, this last year, stepping in for Marcus Williams. But the total, I mean, the 7th round draft picks the Ravens have ever had are not that great. And in a way, you have to think of Voorhees as a 6th round draft pick because of the capital they traded him for him. But in terms of the actual round he was selected, I think there's a very good probability he ends up being the best player the Ravens have ever drafted in that round.
Yeah, I feel like he can be to the Ravens what Trey Smith has been to the Chiefs. A guy who fell down the board to day 3 as a result of a medical something. Even though Trey Smith wasn't coming off an injury, it was more of like they didn't know about some kind of heart thing, and now he's one of their key core starting offensive linemen. And I feel like he can be to the Ravens what Trey Smith is to the Chiefs. And that's a great day 3 steal. And how often can you say a 7th round pick? And how often are we going to be this excited about a 7th round pick? It's not maybe the next kicker 10 years after Justin Tucker retires or something like that. Like this is usually the excitement reserved for 7th round picks are usually usually for a specialist or like nobody knew Brock Purdy was going to be Brock Purdy last year. But like this for a guy who was like said clearly a day 2 talent to get him at this stage in the draft, even though he's not going to be available this year, I think was well worth the investment.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think he's the draft pick I'm probably 3rd most excited about in the group after the top 2. In terms of what, obviously we don't get to see him this year. That's kind of sad. It's very much like a Ajabo last year, but boy, am I looking forward to 2024 and what he can do.
Honestly, Ken, like as far as like judging like my reactions to the picks, he was the one I was he was one I was like the second most excited about after Zay, just because like where they got him and what I know this guy can do to mean for this team. I'm not poo-pooing on the Trenton Simpson pick, but I was like the fact of, whoa, they got him there. Like I was expecting him to potentially go undrafted and then maybe redshirt with somebody for them to come back and get him under that team control for the next 4 years. Like I said, like the value. Like I'm a big value guy. Like if you can get a guy who's been sliding down the boards and like at a much lower pick, like that I projected or that was widely consensusly projected to go much higher, kudos, man. Kudos. I mean, like they come into this draft with only 5 picks, in with 6, and your 6th one be what was pretty much a second round pick. Because they said based on his talent level is that kind of sweetened the pot for me, and probably the reason why the Ravens got a lot of A grades, a lot of A's and B's for their drafts, according to media pundits.
Mm-hmm. They love the Flowers pick too. A lot of people did, but yeah, you're right. The Voorhees pick is just an outstanding value, and it's gonna be all the sweeter that the Browns traded him the pick. It's gonna be a Lodi Nada all over again.
That's crazy. See, that's another thing. I know we're gonna get off here. I really don't understand these interdivisional trades. I mean, the NFC North have done it a bunch of times. Why would you want to help your opponent get better? If this guy, like I think the Vikings or the Lions traded with the Packers so they could get one of their tight ends, Tucker Kraft, or the other guy, or Luke Musgrave. If this guy is catching double-digit touchdowns against you for the next 5-6 years, you help make that happen. Like I just don't get the interdivisional thing in this event. The Ravens are actually benefiting from it. So I'm not really tripping this time around. But I personally, from a competitive standpoint, why would you want to help your rival get a player that they're targeting that they can use to hurt you?
Yeah, and if you're the Browns, have a little humility about this situation and understand the Ravens probably know what they're doing if they're willing to trade a 6 from next year to get back into 7. It's a fairly significant difference in JJ value, or basically in a lot of charts value, between the 6th and 7th round. I mean, JJ value, it's enormous. It's like 10-1 in terms of the relative value of the picks. So it's not insignificant that the Ravens would want to do this, and maybe the Browns should have just sat there and thought about it for, I don't know, the 30 seconds they probably had while the clock was running, and say, who do they want here? Who are they targeting? And do we want that guy going up against us, even though we want the 6th round pick next year, no doubt about it. But you're right. I mean, it's a real question. And I think the Browns probably lost some humility in thinking about, boy, we'd love to have a 6th round pick because we can really make something out of that next year, instead of thinking, if the Ravens are using a 6th round pick, they know what they're doing. And right? So they're not going to lose it. So anyway, I hope the Ravens are right about this one. That's just another point. Josh, absolutely love doing these kind of shows with you. We had so much fun over the course of the draft. Having you on day one was a real pleasure, of course, and all the times we get to talk football, I enjoy it thoroughly. Tell folks one more time where they can find you online.
Yes, you can find all my Ravens work at Heavy on Ravens. That's the Ravens website for heavy sports. I can be found on Twitter at JoshReed907. And if you're from Anchorage or just like quality stories, I'm a full-time sports reporter for Anchorage Daily News, and got some awesome quality features up there too.
All right, outstanding. Thanks for coming on again, Josh. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a show this summer, I got lots of openings. Whether you want that one play, anything about franchise building, if you've got reflections on the draft you don't think I've covered here, and you want to say, well, wait a minute, this is a complete change in philosophy, I'd love to hear it. If you've got a new metric that you think is really important, you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear it. If you want to talk scheme, let's talk about it. Anyway, DMs are always open on Twitter. Hit me up there, and I'll get back to you very quickly. Josh, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken, like always.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.